Finally, Goku had returned to Earth, but nobody knew he had arrived. To him, everything was meant to be a surprise. After so much time spent training off-world, the only thing he wanted was to come home. He wanted to see Chi-Chi and try to calm her down after his long absence, and above all, to see Gohan. He closed his eyes and extended his ki as he always did to sense his family and friends. But something was not right. Several seconds passed, and he felt nothing. No Gohan, no Krillin, no Piccolo, no Vegeta, absolutely no one. At first he thought maybe they were sleeping or training far away, but it made no sense. Even then, he should have been able to feel them. Instead, all he perceived was an absolute void, as if there was not a single, powerful presence on the entire planet. That was what truly disturbed him. Without thinking twice, he flew at top speed toward the nearest city, hoping to find some answers. But what he found left him completely paralyzed. The city had disappeared, and nothing remained but ruins. Destroyed buildings, cracked streets, and a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. There were no people, there was no movement, only the wind dragging dust through the remains of what was once a place full of life. Goku fell to Shiva. This was not normal. Suddenly, a piece of paper hit his leg. It was an old newspaper, yellowed by time. He picked it up with curiosity, thinking that maybe he would find an explanation there. But when his eyes stopped on the date, everything changed. 20 years had passed. Goku did not react instantly. He looked again. He read it one more time trying to process it, but there was no doubt. 20 years. His breathing became heavy. This was impossible. For him, only 1 year had passed. 1 year training on Yard Rat, learning instant transmission and nothing more. There was no way time had moved forward so much. Something was wrong, very wrong. His body reacted by instinct. He tensed up and prepared himself, because in that moment he understood something. This was not an accident. Someone had caused all of this. It was then that he felt something strange. It was not here, but it was definitely a presence. It was coming from a dark alley among the shadows. Without hesitation, Goku ordered them to come out, and what appeared in front of him baffled him even more. It was a young blonde woman walking with absolute calm, as if the ruins around her meant nothing. Goku tried to sense her energy, but he could not. It was as if she simply did not exist. Before he could react, the young woman called him by his name, Son Goku. That surprised him. How could she know him? But what she said next was even worse. According to her, Goku was dead. He had died years ago from a heart virus. Goku could not believe it. He had just arrived. He had not even been on Earth to get sick. And then another presence appeared. A young man stepped out of the shadows with a completely calm attitude, observing him as if he were something that should not be there. It was at that moment when Goku understood something else. He could not feel the ki of either of them, and the answer he received confirmed his worst suspicion. They did not have ki, they were not human or normal warriors. When Goku asked about his friends, the answer was direct. They were gone. The world had ended a long time ago, and he was not there to see it. The tension exploded. In that instant, Goku demanded answers, but he did not have time to react. In the blink of an eye, the young man disappeared, and in the next instant, a brutal blow struck Goku with devastating force. He went flying, crashing through buildings and destroying everything in his path. He did not see it coming, he felt nothing. It was as if he had been hit by something invisible. He barely managed to get up among the rubble, confused, but also wounded. He had never experienced anything like this. It was then that he decided to fight seriously. His aura exploded, his hair turned gold, and he launched an attack. But what followed was even more shocking. No matter how much he attacked, no matter his speed, his blows simply did not work. It was like fighting against two completely superior beings. He managed to connect a direct hit, but it caused no effect. They did not even move. At that moment, he received a brutal counterattack. A blow to the stomach that took his breath away, followed by a kick that knocked him down completely. He had no chance, and the worst part was that they did not get tired. But he did. And as he tried to get up, Goku saw something that made him understand everything. A red symbol on his enemy's clothing, the red ribbon, the same army he had destroyed when he was a child. But this time it was different. They were creations of Dr. Jiro, and they had been designed with a single purpose: to kill Goku. All that destroyed world, all that chaos, all of it had happened because of him. In that future, Goku had died prematurely, and his friends had tried to stop them, but they failed and paid with their lives. Goku tried to get up one more time, but his body no longer responded the same way. Meanwhile, his enemies raised their hands, forming two spheres of energy capable of destroying him completely. Everything was over, or so it seemed, because in that same instant, very far from there, something had changed. An energy appeared. An energy that should not exist. Gohan felt it and could not believe it. It was his father. Even though everyone believed he had died, Goku was alive, but he was also in danger. Without wasting time, Gohan took off at top speed, followed by Trunks. Meanwhile, in the ruins, Goku barely stayed on his feet, ready to receive the final attack. His enemies were about to finish him off, but just when all seemed lost, the sky broke. A figure descended at top speed, impacting between them like a bolt of lightning. The ground shook. Soon the dust covered everything, and when it finally dissipated, someone was standing there. A warrior marked by war, with no fear in his gaze. Goku looked up, unable to believe it. It was Gohan. And for the first time in a long time, there was hope. Gohan disappears in an instant and reappears in front of Android 18. Without giving her time to react, he connects a brutal blow directly to her face that sends her flying through the remains of the destroyed city. He does not stop for a single second. He plants his feet on the ground, flexes his knees, and releases all his energy. His hair turns gold. His eyes change to an intense green and his aura explodes with force. He is a Super Saiyan. Goku, from the ground, feels it immediately. There is no doubt that is Gohan. But this time he is not the only one watching. Android 17 looks at him with a different interest, more serious, more calculating. At that same moment, another presence descends at top speed and lands nearby. It is Trunks, panting with a sword in his hand, ready to give his life if necessary. However, something stops him completely. His gaze is fixed on the wounded man on the ground. It is Goku. His mind cannot process it. That face, that energy, it is impossible. Goku tries to get up, confused and disoriented, trying to understand what is happening, but there is no time for explanations. The androids attack without warning, and Gohan, along with Trunks, react instantly, rising into the sky to intercept them. The battle begins, and the air breaks with each impact. The shockwaves make the remains of the buildings tremble. The dust rises in columns, and the concrete fragments fly as if they were leaves. Gohan fights with a controlled fury. His movements leave golden trails in the air. Each blow is precise. Each attack is charged with years of struggle. Trunks, for his part, fights with discipline, using his sword to maintain distance against Android 18, forcing her to respect his space. But soon it becomes evident what Gohan already knew for years. The androids do not get tired, they do not lose speed, they do not show wear and tear, they do not breathe heavily. Android 17 dodges attacks that should destroy him without the slightest effort. His expression does not change, he only smiles with an arrogant calm, as if he already knew the outcome of the fight. Gohan clenches his teeth and intensifies his offensive. He launches a fierce combination, but 17 slides between the blows with absurd ease and responds with a direct impact to the face that makes him retreat. On the other side of the combat, Trunks tries to cut Android 18 with a horizontal attack, but she spins her body with an insulting elegance, dodges the sword by millimeters, and responds with a brutal knee to the stomach. The air disappears from his body instantly, his posture breaks, and before he can react, a kick launches him against the ground. The street explodes on impact. Trunks tries to get up, but his body does not respond. He is completely dazed. At that moment, Gohan sees Trunks fall, and for a fraction of a second his guard opens. That is enough. Android 17 has no mercy. He launches an upward blow directly to the chin, and then a side kick that sends him flying. Gohan falls near Trunks, raising a cloud of dust around him. Both remain on the ground, defeated. Above them, the androids float in the air, watching them as if all of this were already decided from the beginning. Goku, lying on the ground, can barely see what is happening. His body is wrecked, every muscle hurts, but his mind remains active, clinging to a single idea. Gohan clenches his teeth and forces his body to move. Even if he cannot win, he is not going to allow them to die. He gets up with difficulty, staggering, and at the last moment appears behind them. He places a firm hand on Gohan's shoulder and another on Trunks' shoulder. He has no clear destination, there is no key to follow, there is no safe place. He only thinks of one thing, as far away as possible. The energy spheres fall from the sky like meteors. The ground breaks, everything explodes. But just before the destruction reaches them, they disappear. Silence receives them. They appear in a completely deserted place, surrounded by rock formations, with a dry wind whistling through the cracks in the terrain. Trunks falls to his side, clutching his stomach as he tries to recover his breath. No one speaks for several seconds. Only the wind is heard. Gohan stands up slowly and walks toward Goku with unsure steps, as if he were afraid everything would disappear if he got too close. Then comes the truth, a truth that breaks everything. Goku died, not in battle, but from a virus. And after that, everything collapsed. The Z-Warriors fell one by one. Piccolo, Vegeta, Krillin, they all died. The world was left in the hands of the androids. The silence that follows is heavier than any blow, but there is still hope. In what remains of Capsule Corporation, hidden underground, she continues fighting. When she sees Goku, her mind cannot process it. Her body gives in and she falls unconscious. Upon waking, she looks at him as if he were a ghost, but he is not. Goku is there. Little by little, the explanation takes shape. His arrival was not normal. It was an accident, a distortion in space-time that tore him from his original line and threw him into this future. A future where he does not exist, but also a future that can still change. Bulma reveals something key, a small capsule, the cure for the virus that killed Goku. This time the story does not have to repeat itself, but the problem remains the same. The androids, stronger than ever, unstoppable, tireless. Goku understands it immediately. It is not enough to fight. They have to become stronger, much stronger. Again and again he falls. And so begins the true training. Days, weeks, months. Again and again he falls. The earth trembles with each combat. Again and again he falls. Goku gives them no rest. Again and again he falls. He pushes them to the limit again and again. Again and again he falls. And then something fundamental changes. Again and again he falls. Gohan must not transform only to fight. Again and again he falls. He must live as a Super Saiyan all the time. Again and again he falls. Eat like this, sleep like this, exist like this, until that power stops feeling like something forced and becomes natural. Again and again he falls. Gradually the aura stops being wild. Again and again he falls. The power stabilizes, the tension disappears. Again and again he falls. Trunks, for his part, trains to absolute exhaustion. Again and again he falls. Again and again he falls. Again and again he gets up, until finally his energy explodes. His hair turns gold. His eyes change. He has achieved it. Now they are three warriors against a doomed world. But just when everything seems to advance, the earth trembles again. In the distance, columns of black smoke rise on the horizon. Gohan feels it immediately. Trunks grips the handle of his sword. They have returned. Trunks wanted to advance with them, but Goku stopped him immediately. There was no time to argue or to let oneself be carried away by rage. The situation was too dangerous, and Goku had already understood something crucial. If they were going to face the androids again, they needed a safe escape route. That is why he ordered Trunks to stay in that place and to release his energy to the maximum without moving for a single instant. He wanted to turn his ki into a kind of lighthouse, a fixed point he could feel from any part of the planet to use instant transmission at the exact moment. Trunks trembled with helplessness because he wanted to fight, he wanted to take revenge, and he wanted to prove that he could also carry that battle. But in the end, he understood that Goku was not improvising. He clenched his teeth, raised his energy, and stood firm, becoming the only way out they would have if everything went wrong. In the next instant, Goku and Gohan took off toward the sky and arrived at the destroyed city. What they found was a landscape of terror. There were newly collapsed buildings, flames spreading through the streets, smoke rising everywhere, and distant screams that could still be heard among the chaos. In the midst of that destruction, floating with a sickening calm, were androids 17 and 18. They did not seem tired. They did not seem altered. They did not seem worried about anything. It was as if all that hell was for them a simple game. As soon as they saw Goku and Gohan appear, both showed a mocking grimace, as if they were amused to see them return. Gohan took a step forward with eyes filled with fury. There was no longer room for useless words. He had not gone there to negotiate or to try to reason with monsters who enjoyed human suffering. He had gone to fight. The clash was immediate. Goku launched himself against Android 17, and Gohan went directly to face Android 18. The air exploded with the violence of the initial impact. For a few seconds, the battle seemed more balanced than before. Both Goku and Gohan had grown, they had trained, and they had arrived with a different determination. However, very soon it became clear that the androids were still on top. 17 moved with absurd precision. He heard Goku's movements, dodged by millimeters, and responded with exact blows, as if he knew in advance every decision of his rival. Each counterattack was a brutal discharge on Goku's body. A punch to the stomach, another to the face, a kick that sent him against the rubble. Goku was bleeding, his body was suffering, but his mind did not stop calculating. He understood that trying to defeat 17 by pure force at that moment would not give him results. If he continued fighting in that way, he was only going to wear himself out until he fell. Then he came up with a risky idea, a quick maneuver to divide the battlefield. Instead of continuing to exchange blows, Goku changed strategy, took advantage of a minimal opening, and launched himself on top of 17, holding him firmly by the torso. The android barely managed to show surprise. At that same instant, Goku placed 2 fingers on his forehead and used instant transmission. Both disappeared from the battlefield and appeared thousands of miles away from there, in a frozen desert, a dead land where there were no cities, no shelters, no nothing to protect. Goku released 17 in the air, and without giving him time to react, he used the technique again to return immediately to the city. The idea was simple but desperate, to remove one of the androids from the stage, even if only for a few seconds, enough to help Gohan and finish 18 before 17 could return. But when Goku returned, Gohan's situation was critical, and she was pressing him without giving him a break. Her attacks were cold, precise, and constant. She showed no sign of fatigue, and each blow seemed designed to break Gohan's defense little by little. He kept fighting with everything he had, but the rhythm imposed by the android was stifling. At that moment, Goku appeared behind her, and both he and Gohan understood each other without needing to speak. They attacked at the same time. The pressure changed suddenly. For the first time in that combat, 18 was forced to retreat. Gohan connected a brutal kick to her ribs, and Goku finished her off with an attack that smashed her violently against the ground, opening a huge crater in the middle of the destroyed street. Both descended with energy accumulating in their hands. They knew that was the moment. If they acted fast, they could eliminate 18 before the balance of the battle broke again. However, that moment of hope lasted very little. The sky seemed to rip with a monstrous speed when Android 17 returned, converted into a projectile of pure fury. He had returned sooner than Goku expected. His face showed genuine rage, and he entered the battle fully, attacking Gohan with ruthless violence. The impact was devastating. Gohan was sent flying through several buildings, crashing through walls and sinking among mountains of rubble. Goku barely managed to react when 18 came out of the crater. There was no longer a trace of mockery on her face, only a sharp, dangerous coldness. She launched herself at him with a storm of blows so fierce that Goku could barely cover himself. Each impact hit his chest, his face, his sides. Little by little, his body began to give in. The difference in resistance between the androids and the Saiyans was becoming more and more evident. Goku ended up on his knees, spitting blood with blurred vision and broken breath. Then the worst happened. In the sky, 17 and 18 placed themselves next to each other and began to concentrate energy at the same time. Their hands rose, and between both a gigantic dark sphere began to form, charged with a power capable of erasing everything in its path. The heat and pressure of that attack filled the environment with a sensation of imminent death. Goku looked up and understood that if that sphere fell, the entire city would disappear with them included. He looked toward the area where Gohan had been buried and felt that history was about to repeat itself. Again a defeat, again a failure, again helplessness, but he refused to allow it. He forced his badly wounded body to stand up. He flew at ground level to the rubble, found Gohan, and pulled him out by his clothes. Then he closed his eyes in the midst of the chaos, ignoring the pain and desperately searching for the only key that could save him, the key of Trunks. He found it just in time. At the same instant that the dark sphere fell and turned the city into a hell of fire and destruction, Goku used instant transmission. He and Gohan disappeared at the last second. They reappeared next to Trunks outside the battlefield and collapsed on the ground without strength. The transformation undone by exhaustion. Trunks was paralyzed at seeing them in that state. He asked no questions. He wasted no time. He understood that the fight had been a disaster and that the urgent thing was to get them out. He carried them and headed as fast as possible back to the shelter. Bulma worked for hours to stabilize them. Bandages, medicines, open wounds, internal blows, blood everywhere. The natural resistance of the Saiyans did the rest. Little by little, both began to recover. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no relief or pride in having survived. The only thing left was a bitter sensation of inadequacy. When Goku was finally able to stand up, his face showed a tense calm. The calm of someone who had already accepted that fighting at the same level was not going to work. Gohan observed him with seriousness. Trunks did too. Both knew they needed a different answer. It was then that Goku spoke of a special place, a site that seemed like a legend, a place where time did not run as in the outside world, a place where a single day outside was equivalent to a full year inside. That place was the Lookout of Kami, and inside it was the hyperbolic time chamber. The idea hit all three at the same time. If that place really still existed, then they still had a chance. Not an immediate opportunity or an easy victory, but the real possibility of closing the power gap that separated them from the androids. Without wasting any more time, Goku took Gohan and Trunks to the lookout using instant transmission. When they appeared on the white tiles of the place, the sensation was strange. There was absolute silence. A silence so deep it seemed unnatural, as if the entire planet had stopped breathing. Trunks looked around, shocked. He had never been there. To him, that place was not part of a happy memory, but a relic of a better world that had practically disappeared. Gohan, for his part, felt a strange mix of nostalgia and tension. He had heard of that place when he was a child, in a time when stories were still promises of growth and not desperate resources to survive. In front of them was Mr. Popo. Seeing Goku, he remained completely motionless, as if his mind needed several seconds to accept that he really was still alive. Goku, wounded but firm, explained that they needed to enter the hyperbolic time chamber immediately. Mr. Popo listened to them with seriousness and then reminded them of the rules. Only 2 people could enter at a time, and each person had a limited number of entries in their entire life. If they stayed inside beyond the allowed time or lost access to the door, they could be trapped forever in that endless void. Trunks felt a shiver hearing that, but Goku was already thinking of a strategy. He decided that the first stage would be together with Gohan. The 2 would enter, train for a full year inside the chamber, and when they came out, Gohan would enter a second time, this time accompanied by Trunks. That meant Gohan was going to spend 2 whole years inside that white hell, but he accepted without hesitation. He knew there was no other alternative. Mr. Popo led them through the empty corridors of the lookout until they reached the huge golden doors. The atmosphere was solemn, almost sacred. Everything was motionless, without voices, without presence, as if the place itself remembered better times. When the doors opened, a heavy pressure gushed from the interior. On the other side, there was no recognizable landscape. There were no mountains, no blue sky, no walls, only a white void that seemed to never end. Goku and Gohan exchanged a look. No speeches were needed. The 2 understood what it meant to cross that threshold. They were going to enter a place designed to push the body and mind to the absolute limit, and yet they advanced without looking back. Inside the hyperbolic time chamber, the white void was not simply an immense space. It was a living presence, a kind of silent entity that seemed to devour the hope of anyone who entered there. The moment the heavy door closed behind them, Trunks felt his lungs compress and the air become unbearably dense. The gravity, 10 times that of Earth, fell on his body like an invisible hammer, crushing him against the cold marble floor. His muscles tensed to the limit, his teeth ground with rage, and his face was stuck to the floor while he tried to resist that brutal pressure. He felt as if his own bones were about to burst from the inside. A few steps from him, Gohan's silhouette was drawn firm against that white immensity, motionless, serene, as if the weight of the place could no longer bend him. But Gohan did not reach out his hand to help him up. He knew that in that place, misunderstood compassion could become a sentence. With a firm voice, without unnecessary harshness, but without allowing weakness, Gohan made it clear to Trunks that he should not be fooled by his senses. The gravity was only the physical burden, the visible part of the challenge. The true enemy inside the hyperbolic time chamber was the silence. That endless silence that got into the mind and wore down the spirit. He warned him that if he expected someone to help him every time he fell, then the androids would always find him on his knees. He told him that he only had two options: adapt to the pressure and turn it into part of his strength, or allow that void to destroy his will. Trunks, trembling with effort, put a hand on the floor and began to sit up inch by inch. His entire body burned with pain, but in his chest another thing began to grow, the fire of his Saiyan blood. Then he took a breath as best he could, and still with his voice broken by the pressure, decided he was not going to break. He had spent his whole life looking at the sky with fear, waiting for a flash of energy at any moment to announce his mother's death or his own. If that place was a hell, then he would learn to become the master of its flames. Gohan observed him with a cold half-smile, an expression born of years of war and ruins. He ordered him to raise his guard and stop thinking of the hyperbolic time chamber as a place where they were only going to survive. They had entered there for something much bigger. They were not training to resist, they were training to become the worst nightmare of their enemies. Without giving him more room to breathe, Gohan ordered him to attack, and so began a training that stopped measuring days as time and began to feel them as hammer blows molding two bodies and two spirits. Months passed inside that white infinite. The absolute void began to play with Trunks' mind. There were no sunrises or sunsets to mark the passage of time. There were no sounds, there were no references, only an endless white horizon that seemed to swallow every emotion. There were nights in which Trunks, covered with new scars, sat at the edge of the platform and felt anxiety pierce his chest. His determination was strong, but the loneliness weighed more than he had imagined. Gohan noticed him, always vigilant. He saw how sometimes his student's conviction wavered under the weight of memories, isolation, and guilt. In one of those moments, with a broken voice and a heart heavy with anguish, Trunks confessed that every time he closed his eyes, he continued to hear the screams of the people. He wondered if, while they were there apparently wasting time, more people were not dying. He wondered if when they came out there would still be anything left to protect. Gohan listened to him in silence. He did not answer immediately because he knew that doubt was not a simple complaint. It was the true poison that the hyperbolic time chamber wanted to sow in him. Finally, he told him to listen well. The people were already dying. The world continued to suffer with every minute they spent inside there. But if they went out at that moment as they were, they would not be saviors, but only two more bodies in the long list of victims of the androids. The sacrifice of staying there was necessary precisely so that those deaths would not be in vain. They could not save the present if they did not first acquire the power sufficient to secure the future. He forced him to understand that he no longer trained for pride or for revenge, but to become a weapon at the service of peace. Trunks clenched his fists with force, while the tears of frustration evaporated before falling. Then he accepted the truth. He had no right to get tired or to doubt. If the androids were the darkness, he was going to become the sun that erased it forever. A full year passed for them inside the chamber, although in the outside world only one day had passed. When finally the door of the hyperbolic time chamber opened again, the air of the lookout felt light, almost sweet. Gohan came out first. His physical presence was imposing. His shoulders were wider, his body looked more mature, and his gaze had a depth that imposed respect immediately. His Super Saiyan state no longer seemed a transformation forced by rage, but a natural extension of his own soul. Trunks came out behind him, and the change in his body and his spirit was equally evident. There was no longer a trace of the scared boy who had learned to survive by hiding. Now there was a warrior. His aura vibrated with a controlled frequency, lethal and clean. Goku was waiting for them with his arms crossed, leaning against a column of the lookout. As soon as he felt their energy, a smile of pure satisfaction lit up his face. The change was impressive. Even before seeing them, he could feel the difference in their ki. Gohan had exceeded all his expectations, and Trunks had finally become a man worthy of his lineage. Trunks bowed his head with respect and acknowledged that he owed everything to the teachings of Gohan and the example he had given him inside the chamber. This time history was not going to repeat itself. The androids would not stop them again. Gohan, for his part, showed no arrogance or anxiety, only a cold and mature security. There were no more doubts. The Earth had waited too long. It was time to finish this once and for all. The three descended toward Capsule Corp like three rays of hope, crossing the darkness of the underground shelter. Bulma was surrounded by diagrams, electronic parts, and tools, completely concentrated on her work when she felt the rush of air that their arrival caused. She turned suddenly and let the soldering iron fall to the floor. Seeing Gohan and Trunks, she was completely shocked. Only 1 day had passed since they had left, but before her eyes it seemed they had aged entire years. Trunks was taller, stronger, and his gaze no longer had that constant fear that she knew so well. Without thinking, she ran toward him. Trunks hugged her tightly and told her that this time he had not returned to tell her that they had to hide again. This time he had returned to tell her that the fear was over. They were ready. Gohan approached Bulma with a smile loaded with affection and also a certain serene sadness. He confirmed to her that it had worked. The chamber had given them the time the world had denied them. Now the fate of the androids was sealed. At that moment, Goku took a step forward and his expression became more solemn. There was something he had to say before going to the final battle. He explained to Bulma that once they defeated androids 17 and 18, he would return to his original timeline. His presence in that future had been a gift from fate, but it was not his place. He belonged to the past, to the world where he could still prevent that tragedy from ever occurring. Bulma understood it. She could not ask him to stay in a broken future when in his time his own family and his own life awaited him. However, she begged him for one thing, to take the medicine for his heart. She was not going to accept that he survived the war against the androids only to die later from the disease. Goku gave his word. He promised her that he would live to see his own Gohan grow and that he would always talk to them about the heroes he had met in that future. But Goku was not finished. Before leaving, he shared an idea that went far beyond simply eliminating the androids. He reminded Bulma that the ship he had used to escape from Namek still existed, the ship of the Ginyu Special Forces. If she managed to find it and repair it with her technology, then they could travel to New Namek. Bulma and Gohan looked at each other with absolute wonder. They immediately understood what that meant. The Dragon Balls of Namek. Goku confirmed the idea. If they traveled there, they could use those balls to revive Piccolo. And if Piccolo returned to life, then Kami would also return, and with him the Dragon Balls of Earth would return. That would open the possibility of bringing back all those who had fallen during that unjust war, Krillin, Vegeta, and so many other lives broken by the reign of terror of the androids. Bulma covered her mouth while tears welled in her eyes. It had been decades since she allowed herself to dream of something like that, not only to free the Earth, but to give it back its life. Not only to survive, but to recover a home. Trunks felt his chest fill with something he had almost forgotten. Real hope. Goku smiled and reminded them that it was not yet time to give thanks. First, they had to open that path with their own hands. First, they had to face the androids and finish them forever. The city, meanwhile, remained sunk in a silence of death, interrupted only by the creaking of abandoned buildings that surrendered to the passing of time. In the sky, floating with the natural arrogance of those who had never known a true defeat, androids 17 and 18 observed the landscape with boredom. 17 commented that everything had become disappointing. There was no longer anyone capable of offering them a fun challenge. He even proposed going to destroy the cities of the north because the ruins they had below no longer even seemed entertaining to him. 18 agreed. Everything had become monotonous, but then they noticed a presence approaching. The two annoying insects, as they saw them, had returned once more. Gohan advanced toward them, leaving Goku and Trunks at a safe distance. In his way of walking, there was not the slightest trace of doubt. The wind hit his clothes, but his body remained as firm as a rock, impossible to move. When he was close enough, he looked up and declared that the game was over. That day he was not there to fight with them, as if that were just another combat. That day he was there to execute the sentence the entire world had dictated for every life they had taken without mercy. The androids laughed. 17, mocking him, made a comment about his appearance as if it were enough to change his hair and get serious to achieve something he had not achieved in 10 years, and then he launched himself to the attack. But what followed was not a fight. It was a crushing demonstration of superiority. 17's laughter was immediately transformed into a muffled scream when Gohan released his ki in a controlled explosion. The pressure was so devastating that the ground around him was pulverized on the spot. Gohan disappeared from sight and appeared right in front of 17. His fist impacted directly on the android's stomach with a violence so brutal that the shockwave collapsed several nearby buildings. 17 doubled over and spat synthetic fluid, while his eyes opened with incredulity. For the first time in his existence, he felt something he never thought possible: true pain. 18 tried to intervene, attacking from the side, but Gohan did not even need to turn completely. In his voice, there was no uncontrolled rage. There was judgment. There was a terrible calm. With a fluid movement loaded with contempt, he raised his free hand and pointed it toward her. In his voice, there was no uncontrolled rage. There was judgment. There was a terrible calm. He told her that they were nothing more than defective machines in a world that no longer belonged to them. Then he released a massive blast of golden energy, as bright as the sun. The attack reached 18 before she could even scream. The light enveloped her completely and disintegrated her atom by atom. No trace of her remained, only the echo of a gigantic explosion that cleared the sky. 17, lying among the rubble, was left looking at the void where his sister had disappeared, and in that instant something reached him that he had always despised: fear. His voice broke, denying what he had just seen. It could not be. They were the most powerful. Dr. Jiro had told him they were perfect, but Gohan replied with a simple and definitive truth. Their perfection had never been real. It had only been an illusion built on the suffering of others. And that was precisely why their era ended there. Gohan extended his arm and concentrated a bluish sphere of energy at the tip of his fingers. The power he gathered lit up the entire environment. Then, with a precise gesture, he fired. The blast turned the entire city into a sea of light. A pillar of energy rose toward space, taking with it the last stain of evil that continued to infect the earth. Then came the silence. But it was no longer a silence of death or devastation. It was a silence of peace. The smoke began to dissipate, and for the first time in 17 years, the air no longer smelled of ash or destruction. Trunks fell to his knees and hit the ground with his fist, while tears ran freely down his face. They were not tears of weakness. They were the tears of a man who could finally let go of the weight of an entire world carried on his back. Between sobs, he shouted that everything was over, that it had finally finished. He called his mother. He called Gohan as if he needed to say it out loud to truly believe it. Gohan approached and hugged him with brotherly strength, sharing with him that instant of absolute relief. Goku joined them and put a hand on both of their shoulders. He told them he felt deeply proud. They had proven that the human spirit united to the will of a Saiyan could become invincible. Some months passed in front of the time machine. The group gathered for the final farewell. Everything was ready. Goku's machine would take him back to the past, while the repaired Namekian ship would be the next step to seek the resurrection of all the fallen. Trunks looked at Goku with respect and emotion, thanked him for everything, and asked him that when he returned to his time, he tell his father that he had become a warrior worthy of his name, that he had protected his mother and the earth with all the strength of his being. Goku smiled with warmth and assured him that he would tell him. He even said he was sure that in his own way, Vegeta would not stop bragging to everyone about the son he had. Then Goku turned toward Gohan, asked him to take care of that future. He told him he had a noble heart and incomparable strength, and that he must become the protector that the world finally deserved. Gohan responded with a firm voice. He promised him it would be so. He thanked him for having given them a second chance, a chance that the future had almost forgotten could exist. The time machine began to rise and disappeared in a flash of light. Gohan and Trunks stayed watching the sky for some seconds. Then they looked at each other, smiled, and walked toward the ship that would take them to New Namek. The sky was clear, and after entire decades of fear, ruins, and desperation, the future finally had a future again. After the thrilling encounter that completely changed the course of that day, Goku remained in silence for several seconds, looking at the horizon as if trying to order in his mind each of the pieces of an impossible puzzle. Beside him, future Gohan and Trunks observed the other Z warriors with seriousness, aware that the following words would not only sow alarm, but would also destroy once and for all the tranquility that still remained in their hearts. The air felt heavy, almost motionless, as if the Earth itself sensed the threat that had just been born. Finally, Goku took a step forward. His expression no longer transmitted his usual lack of concern, but a firmness uncommon even for him. With a grave voice, he explained that within 3 years, a new threat would appear, not in the form of invaders from space or ancient demons, but of warriors created by the hand of man. Artificial beings, yes, but with a power so monstrous that in the future from which Gohan and Trunks came, they managed to reduce entire cities to dust in a matter of minutes. They did not fight for honor or for conquest or for the desire to rule. They destroyed for pleasure. They killed for fun, and unlike the enemies of the past, these did not get tired, did not doubt, and felt no compassion. Goku's words pierced like blades into the souls of all those present. Krillin swallowed hard. Yamcha looked down with a frown. Tien crossed his arms motionless, but with tense muscles. Bulma, for her part, opened her eyes with incredulity, unable to assimilate that the future could become such an absolute hell. But the most devastating part had not yet been said. Goku breathed deeply and released the final truth. In that timeline, when the day of disaster arrived, he was not there to fight. A heart disease ended his life before the decisive combat even began. He did not fall in battle. He did not die defending the planet. He simply disappeared from the board just when they needed him most. The impact was brutal. The simple idea of a world without Goku was as absurd as it was terrifying. For all of them, although they never admitted it out loud, Goku's presence had always been a kind of silent certainty. When everything got worse, he appeared. When no one else could, he stood up. Imagining a future where not even he was present was like looking into the abyss. But not everyone reacted with fear. Vegeta let out a dry laugh, loaded with contempt, and took a step forward with pride burning in his eyes. His voice cut through the air like a whip. Pathetic. Is that all? Machines created by a bug of a human. It matters little to me how strong they are. If they dare to turn this planet into a graveyard, then the only thing they did was create enemies worthy of me. His energy began to grow slightly, enveloping his body with a suffocating pressure. I do not need warnings from the future. I do not need compassion. If those things appear, I myself will rip off their heads. No artificial creation will ever surpass the Prince of the Saiyans. Piccolo, standing some meters away, said nothing. He remained with his gaze fixed on future Gohan. It was impossible for him to ignore what he had in front of his eyes. The fearful and noble child he had trained years ago had become an adult warrior, serious, wounded, and hardened by a life of loss. There were visible scars on his face, but it was his eyes that were most disturbing. That gaze did not belong to someone young. It was the gaze of a survivor who had lost almost everything and who could no longer afford the luxury of believing in happy endings. Krillin was the first to break the silence. Wait, if you come from the future and know exactly what is going to happen, then tell us once and for all who they really are. How are we supposed to trust all this if we barely understand what is going to happen? Future Gohan advanced slowly. For an instant he looked at the little Gohan of the present, who contemplated him with a mix of wonder and childish confusion. Then he looked up and spoke with serenity. My name is Son Gohan. I come from a future that exists 20 years ahead of this moment. A future where almost all of you died fighting. A future where the Earth stopped being a home and became a field of ruins. The revelation left everyone motionless. Bulma put a hand to her mouth. Krillin stepped back half a step. Even Yamcha, who usually took things lightly, was completely frozen. The resemblance was undeniable. It was there, in the gaze, in the voice, in the way of standing. Little Gohan, open-mouthed, could not stop looking at that adult version of himself, as if he were contemplating a stranger and at the same time his own destiny. Trunks remained quiet. Gohan and Goku had agreed to keep his identity a secret. It was not the time. Any unnecessary alteration could break too many things. Before the others, he was presented simply as a young warrior from the future, ally and inseparable companion of Gohan in that devastated era. Then, Bulma, unable to contain herself, intervened with a crushing logic. Let us see, one moment. If we know that the problem comes from a scientist, from a laboratory, and from some androids that have not yet awakened, why do we not destroy them before? We can look for that doctor, dismantle his base, and finish everything right now. Why wait 3 years for the world to put itself in danger again? No one responded immediately because it made sense. Absolute sense, cold and brilliant. For some seconds, even the wind seemed to stop. Yamcha nodded immediately. Krillin did too. Even Teen squinted his eyes, recognizing that that was the most effective solution. Future Gohan and Trunks exchanged a brief look, almost incredulous in their world, where desperation had been the daily bread. An idea so simple and so clean as that one had never materialized. But Vegeta exploded. No way. He roared with fury. Finish the enemy before they show their power. Hide behind a wish or an attack from behind. That is not victory, that is cowardice. He turned toward Goku with an arrogant and dangerous smile. I did not come to this planet to fear some machines. If those androids are really that powerful, then I want to face them. I want to crush them with my own hands. Only then will defeating them have value. To the surprise of several, Goku did not contradict Vegeta. He stayed pensive for a few moments, with a half smile drawing itself little by little on his face. Bulma's idea is very good. Seriously, it is. But now that I know I have the medicine to cure my disease, now that I know I am going to stay here, I cannot help but feel it. He squeezed the little bottle he had stored. I want to fight. I want to see how far we can go if we train seriously during these 3 years. This time we are not going to run toward a defeat. This time we know the danger, and that changes everything. Trunks clenched his teeth with force. In his interior, a part of him hated that answer. It was exactly the type of thought that had condemned his future, that Saiyan obsession with testing oneself, with looking for the perfect battle, with never choosing the easy path even if it were the safest. And yet, he also knew that something was different. In his timeline, Goku never arrived. The Z-Warriors fell one by one. No one had time to prepare as they should. But now they did. Now Goku was alive. Now the Gohan of the present, Goku, Piccolo, Vegeta, and all the others, had 3 full years to become monstrously stronger. Future Gohan was the one who ended up tipping the balance. If we train together, this time we could overcome the disaster before it happens, he said in a low voice. Maybe this world has the chance that ours never had. That was how the decision was made. They would not look for shortcuts. They would not eliminate the enemy ahead of time. They would prepare to face them head-on. And with it, the destiny of the Earth began to be rewritten. The following days marked the start of a completely new stage. It was no longer just about training to grow a little more. Now every second counted. Every mistake of the past had to be corrected. Every weakness had to disappear. Goku took the reins of the central training. He gathered Gohan, Trunks, and future Gohan, decided to turn them into an impossible force to stop. Piccolo joined immediately, willing to polish the discipline, perception, and strategy of the group. On the other hand, Vegeta chose his own path, moving away from everyone to undergo a brutal training in solitude, obsessed with surpassing Kakarot once and for all. The first weeks were savage. Goku understood immediately that there was an absolute priority, to take the youngest ones to a new level. Trunks from the future was already powerful, but his strength was molded by pain, not by technique. Little Gohan possessed immense potential, although he was still green, and future Gohan, despite his experience, carried too many mental scars. It was not enough to make them stronger. They had to rebuild the way they fought. Under Goku's guidance, they began by perfecting their bases. Endless hours of hand-to-hand combat, ki control until exhaustion, meditation in frozen waterfalls, endurance tests under extreme gravity. Goku insisted on something that for the others sounded almost absurd. Before looking for a superior transformation, they had to make their current power comfortable, stable, like breathing. Trunks did not understand it at first. In his world, strength had always been synonymous with desperation. More rage, more energy, more violence. But there, training with Goku, he discovered something he had never learned. True power is not born only from breaking oneself, but from dominating oneself. Months later, the great breakthrough arrived. During a brutal session in the mountains, among roars, lightning of energy, and pulverized rocks, little Gohan finally reached the state of Super Saiyan. His golden aura lit up the entire valley, while he shouted with a mix of fear and determination. Trunks followed him shortly after, releasing a much cleaner and more stable transformation than the one he had obtained in his own future. Future Gohan, seeing them, could not help but give a bitter smile. That was exactly what his world never allowed him to live. growth without immediate tragedy. But Goku was not satisfied, he continued demanding more. When they discovered a more muscular and savage variation of the Super Saiyan, many believed they had found the definitive key. The increase in power was tremendous. Their blows made the air tremble. Their auras exploded like living storms. However, Goku again demonstrated why he was different. He showed them that form sacrificed speed, control, and resistance. It was raw power, yes, but inefficient. A trap disguised as an advance. Then he proposed a revolutionary idea. Stay transformed, not during combat, not for some minutes, all the time. Walk, eat, talk, train, rest, live as Super Saiyans until the body stopped feeling the transformation as a burden. At first it seemed like madness, but little by little the method began to give spectacular results. The auras became serene, the energy expenditure dropped. Their movements acquired a terrifying naturalness. What before was a temporary explosion began to turn into a new base state. Future Gohan observed each advance with a mix of admiration and pain. Finally, he understood something that for years he had not been able to name. Goku's greatest strength was not only his power, it was his genius for combat, his ability to see paths where no one else saw them. In that world, with the present, hope was not a romantic illusion, it was a real strategy. Meanwhile, Vegeta also advanced at monstrous steps. In the solitude of the gravity chambers, he pushed his body to inhuman extremes, smashed machines, endured brutal pressures, bled, fell, and got up thousands of times. Finally, he also reached the Super Saiyan, but his method based on pride and violence took him by a different route. He obtained a fierce, devastating force, although less refined than Goku's. The final months arrived, wrapped in a strange calm. Goku, aware that the decisive day was approaching, decided to leave future Gohan one last invaluable tool. He taught him the technique of instant transmission. It was not easy. It required extreme concentration, key sensitivity, and an almost perfect mental clarity. After so attempts, future Gohan managed to heal the principle Dang Sauki Nangda. He would no longer depend solely on the time machine. He would have another path to save his world when the time came to return. And then, without asking permission, the time ran out. The appointed morning dawned clear. The sky looked too peaceful for a day that could decide the history of the planet. Everyone went to the agreed point. Goku was there, healthy and strong. Gohan of the present radiated a serene power. Trunks and future Gohan, hardened, but much more complete than before, stayed attentive to each signal. Piccolo observed in silence. Krillin, Yamcha, and Tien had also improved enormously, and in the distance, as an arrogant presence impossible to ignore, Vegeta waited with his arms crossed. No enemy appeared yet, but the tension was unbearable. Trunks looked at future Gohan. The time machine was still ready for the return, but both had already made their decision. They would not leave yet. Not after having come so far. Not after having trained for 3 years for that instant they would stay until the end. They needed to see with their own eyes that this time the nightmare would be destroyed before devouring the future once again. And so, under that deceptively peaceful sky, with destiny suspended over their heads like an invisible sword, the most powerful warriors of the earth waited for the start of the clash, which would decide if history was destined to repeat itself or if it had finally found the courage to change.